Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a really serious and escalating situation right now in South Asia. A concerted and pretty aggressive campaign targeting the fundamental identity of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
And this isn't just about, local protests. The sources we have detail a dangerous new coordinated phase in what's really a global campaign for religious intolerance.
So our mission today is, well, it's heavy, but it's necessary. We need to understand the fundamental theological roots of this conflict and analyze the chilling precedent that this kind of institutionalized persecution sets.
Absolutely. The Flashpoint is an international religious conference recently held in Dhaka, Bangladesh.
And this wasn't some peaceful meeting of minds. It was a launch pad.
It kicked off a year-long aggressive campaign spearheaded by an organization called Khatme Nubuwwat.
Which means finality of prophethood, right?
Exactly. And their goal is crystal clear: to pressure the Bangladeshi government to officially declare Ahmadis non-Muslims.
It's an attempt to legislate theological belief.
And the stakes couldn't be higher. I mean, if they succeed, it creates a state-sponsored class of targets, which history always shows leads to profound human rights abuses.
Right. They're trying to legislate who belongs and who doesn't. And, the pivot point for this kind of identity politics is almost always a specific theological dispute. Before we get into the legal and violent consequences, let's just clarify the core point of contention. What is the theological distinction that's being weaponized here?
It all really boils down to the concept of prophethood, specifically the status of the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad.
He established the movement in 1889.
That's right. The Ahmadiyya community believes that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was the awaited messianic figure known in Islam as the Imam Mahdi and the promised Messiah.
Okay, can you just quickly define those terms? For listeners who might be unfamiliar, what does claiming to be the Imam Mahdi or Messiah imply within Islam?
Well, the Shahada, the core Islamic creed, is simple. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God.
And Ahmadis subscribe to that.
Firmly. They subscribe to that. They follow all the fundamental tenets, including the 5 pillars. The issue is that the wider Orthodox Muslim world adheres strictly to the absolute and unqualified finality of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
That's the doctrine of Khatme Nubuwwat.
Exactly. Khatme Nubuwwat literally means the finality of prophethood. Most Muslims hold that Prophet Muhammad was the very last prophet. Full stop. The Ahmadiyya community believes Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was a subordinate, non-law-bearing prophet.
Meaning he didn't bring a new book or a new Sharia law?
Precisely. The belief is that he came to reestablish the true teachings of Islam.
So that distinction, subordinate, non-law-bearing, that's where the line is drawn. It's a very nuanced theological point, but it's the one used to claim that Ahmadis are infringing on that traditional understanding.
It's exactly that. It's a matter of interpretation being used to deny identity and, frankly, humanity. But the community itself is vocal about their adherence to the fundamentals.
Do we have anything from them directly?
We do. There's an assertion from an Ahmadi spokesperson who stated, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, "We, the Ahmadis, are Muslims. We believe in Muhammad Rasulullah. We believe Prophet Hazam as the last law-bearing prophet." And they warn that these extremist clerics are, quote, trying to play God in determining who is and is not a Muslim.
That line, trying to play God, that really cuts to the core of it, doesn't it? When theological interpretation becomes the basis for political exclusion, that's where the crisis begins.
And we don't have to guess what happens next if Bangladesh yields to this pressure.
No, we don't. The source material is explicit that Bangladesh will follow the path of Pakistan.
And this is where we really need to spend some time, because Pakistan is the chilling blueprint. It is the only country in the world to have officially declared Ahmadis non-Muslim in its constitution. It's the ultimate, deeply troubling example.
Can you walk us through the specifics of that state-sanctioned persecution? Because it's not just a declaration on paper. It's a total systemic dismantling of civil and religious rights that evolved over decades.
It began with political maneuvering. So, in 1974, political and clerical pressure led to a constitutional amendment that officially declared Ahmadis a non-Muslim minority.
So that was the first step, the legal categorization, making them other.
Yes. But the real devastation came 10 years later, in 1984, with the infamous Ordinance XX.
Ordinance XX, that's a name that every human rights advocate knows because it essentially made practicing the Ahmadi faith a capital offense.
It is the deepest form of religious tyranny you can imagine. Ordinance XX amended the penal code and made it a criminal offense, punishable by imprisonment or even the death penalty, for an Ahmadi to practice their faith publicly, in any meaningful way. This law made it illegal for them to simply call themselves Muslim or, and this phrasing is key, pose as Muslims.
Wait, I need to pause on that. Posing as Muslims, does that mean if they use language common to the faith they identify with, like a greeting, they can be arrested?
Absolutely. The law explicitly forbids them from referring to their places of worship as a mosque. They have to call them places of worship.
Hmm.
They're criminalized if they use the traditional Islamic call to prayer, the azan, and they are criminalized if they propagate their faith, which is a fundamental right everywhere else. The state basically criminalized the very expression of their religious identity.
And turned common acts of worship into potential death sentences. The impact of that on a community's ability to function, to raise children in their faith, to have any kind of civic life, it must just be catastrophic. It's existential.
It is systemic removal. And the irony is just staggering when you remember the founding context of Pakistan. The country's founder, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, championed complete religious freedom. This legal framework just flips that founding principle completely on its head.
And uses the state to enforce one narrow theological reading. This is the catastrophic cycle Bangladesh is now being pressured to enter.
And that pressure is clearly coordinated. It stems from that Dhaka conference, which had scholars from Pakistan, India, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. It's a shared strategy.
An export model for intolerance.
It absolutely is. And on the ground in Bangladesh, groups like Khatme Nubuwwat employ these classic intimidation tactics. They move beyond rhetoric into physical and economic warfare.
What does that look like day to day?
It's relentless. For years, they've targeted the community with harassment, attacks on mosques, beatings, even killings. And crucially, they launched these organized campaigns to deny basic rights and livelihood. They'll pressure local schools to stop Ahmadi children from attending.
So they're trying to cut them off from education.
And from work. They coerce communities and shop owners into denying Ahmadis access to trade, making it impossible for them to earn a living.
So you make the community invisible, uneducated, and economically unviable, all to serve this political declaration.
Exactly. And while the Bangladeshi High Court had sometimes pushed back, suspending government bans on Ahmadiyya publications, the judicial resistance is fragile. The extremists see the current political climate as their moment to make this persecution permanent, to make it constitutional just like in Pakistan.
That organized hostility stands in such stark contrast to the response of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community itself. When you're faced with that, how do you respond? What's their strategy?
Their response is, I think, the most profound part of this whole story. Their guiding motto defines their policy: love for all, hatred for none.
That's a powerful declaration, but it must be incredibly difficult to uphold when you're facing targeted violence and the risk of the death penalty.
It is an active and very costly strategy of nonviolence. The community maintains a strict policy. They refuse to retaliate. Despite targeted killings, assaults, the desecration of their places of worship, they continue to assert their identity peacefully. And that steadfast commitment to peace, it just highlights the moral bankruptcy of their attackers.
So if the stakes are this high and the precedent in Pakistan is this clear, then this campaign in Bangladesh is a critical litmus test for that country's commitment to secularism and religious freedom.
It is.
So what does the international community, what do human rights groups and world leaders need to do right now?
This needs external pressure, and it has to be swift and decisive to prevent this from becoming irreversible. Human rights organizations are clear on three imperatives.
Give us the first one.
First, there has to be public and sustained denunciation of the Khatme Nubuwwat campaign and all the hate speech that comes with it. You have to delegitimize the extremist movement before it can gain governmental traction.
Public condemnation, the first line of defense. Okay, what's the second imperative?
Second, the international community has to pressure Bangladesh to actively protect the fundamental rights of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, their right to freely profess and practice their faith without fear of violence, economic exclusion, or legal sanction.
And the third, the firewall against that Pakistani blueprint.
The world has to ensure that the Bangladeshi government refuses any legislative or constitutional changes that would declare the Ahmadiyya Muslim community non-Muslim. That is the line. That's the line that must not be crossed, because once it is, the door to an Ordinance XX-style criminalization just swings wide open.
It's such a high-stakes moment. The consequence of inaction is permanent, state-sponsored intolerance. Allowing radical elements to dictate who belongs to a faith is a catastrophic step.
It is, and it forces us to consider a really challenging moral question that goes beyond the law. When religious freedom is defined not by your own belief, but by a legal status punishable by death, as we see with Ordinance XX, how does that principle of nonviolence, the one embodied by the Ahmadiyya community, become the most potent form of resistance? It's also the most impossibly difficult. The world has to consider how to ensure that the core freedom of thought and expression championed by Islam itself ultimately prevails over the politics of hate and exclusion.